when Professor Lopez says there are really two important, two significant dates, I think this is so on a mechanical level. This is something to kind of keep you from feeling overwhelmed, that this course is not a history course per se, in which you're expected to know dates and places and all of that sort of thing. So I think it's partly a recognition that as we try to boil it down, as we try to simplify it as much as possible so that we can grasp some very basic concepts, that these are the two most important things. There's no doubt, you're absolutely right, that there were lots of things happening on the planet during these very important centuries. Absolutely. And many of those things as significant and as worthy of research, investigation, and of our time as any. It really, it is a matter, it's a matter of picking and choosing. And the reason why Professor Lopez focused on this particular, essentially it's the greater Mediterranean area, is because this area has given rise now to three insignificant religious movements that embrace probably about, I don't know, I'm roughly guessing, 3/4 of the planet's population, right? And so in terms of picking and choosing, we sort of have to pick and choose what really has the biggest impact and this sort of thing, because essentially what we have is the evolution of Christianity that we've been following quite closely. We're about to experience the rise of Islam, right? And the various versions of these two religious things. So we've seen the rise of Judaism, we've seen the rise of Christianity now, and we're about to get to the rise of Islam, which is in many respects a response to the so-called peoples of the book, and that's the Jewish and the Roman, the Christian heritage. So it is, that is our focus. That is our focus. It is our focus, not because other things aren't incredibly important, but it does form the basis for our particular culture. We are a European culture. Even though we're not on the continent of Europe, we are a European culture, for better or worse, right? And that does not mean to suggest that European culture is by any means the best, or that this is not a contest. We're not trying to establish criteria by which we can establish what is the best or most. But I do think that we can make the argument that to understand, to have a basis for understanding what our culture is about, as a way to both critique our culture and to understand the origins of the conventions within our culture, but also to provide a basis for comparing our culture to other cultures. It's a great place to start. I fully agree with you that a more ecumenical, shall we say, view would be to say, well, this is happening here, this is happening here, this is happening here, and this is happening here. These are all important developments in the history of our human community. We are going to focus on this particular region and these two things. So I think your criticism is well said and entirely appropriate. And I would apologize on behalf of Professor Lopez that I don't think that's the impression he wanted to give, that other cultures. He himself, as you may or may not know, is a scholar of late antiquity, particularly the Egyptian variety of late antiquity. So when he talks about, he has seen all of those things that he featured on it, and his specialty is essentially African, right? Sort of northern African, which is part of the Mediterranean basis of these cultures. This is a big debate, and where I come down on this debate is that I welcome criticisms and debate about the culture that we have inherited and its flaws, its successes, its deficiencies, its excesses. I welcome a strong and vigorous critique of that, but I also believe that critique needs to be based on an understanding of what we're talking about. That we can't just talk about the deficiencies or the excesses of our culture if we really don't know how they evolved, how the culture evolved, what are the basis for it, and why it is the way it is. it's at that point that we can begin, I think, a really meaningful engagement with what's wrong and what we need to address and so on. So, Pierce, I think your observation is great, and it's a gross simplification in terms of the global human community. I think that's where Professor Lopez was coming from, is just as a way to sort of focus our attention on these particular things. It's one of those things that, for better or worse, we have to acknowledge the fact that we are creatures of a particular cultural orientation, and that many of the things that we do on a daily basis are a basis of that, are rooted in those things. There are lots of alternative ways of living and thinking about the human existence, and I really strongly encourage you to explore them and to take advantage of time like you are doing to explore these other cultures with the basis now that you have developed a very strong, I think, insightful basis into your own culture. And let me hasten to add that I don't think, this is again my personal viewpoint, all right, but I'd be willing to argue it. I don't think that we in this classroom fully understand how our culture came to be. We're addressing broad things, but I don't think that we understand, for example, the significance of the Atlantic slave trade. The fact that enriched these European nations and enabled the things that we do in this country today. And we don't even think about it. We don't even think about the largest forced migration in human history. The value of the 4 million enslaved people in this country in the colonial period was worth more than all other investments combined in the United States at the time. It was worth, adjusted for our time, $10 trillion. Now that, and it was something that affected every nook and cranny of our society. Until of course, the gradual abolition of that sort of thing. So our country is true, when we talk about the origins of our country, when we talk about Western society, it's acknowledging and understanding where this all came from, the trade in sugar and rum and cotton, that defined Western culture for centuries. So, we're just really now beginning to understand that and coming to a consciousness of that. And that's not to say that other cultures don't have similarly difficult periods in their history to deal with. Right? The origins of that particular slave economy we are experiencing in antiquity, right? The Greeks, the Romans, the Hebrews, these were all societies that practiced slavery in one form or another. And so we have inherited that, and we are just now, I think, really trying to come to an understanding of what that really means, what that legacy constitutes for us in our society today. It also, Augustine that we're reading today, and who is amazing. I hope you've enjoyed your sitting at his elbow, expanding. As we talked about Augustine, this whole notion of habituation is the underpinnings of the Inquisition, is the underpinnings of the notion that we can impose our will for the good of a person's soul. That is, this comes from Augustine and the arguments that he makes about the nature of the soul, the nature of divinity, the nature of the next world, the kingdom of God, all of that sorts of things. So really, yeah, it's about understanding our world and starting with what ought to be familiar to us, but really, when we start to think about it, I'm growing up in the potato fields of southeastern Idaho. Did I understand any of that? Absolutely not. I was involved in the cultivation of a crop whose origins were in Peru. I didn't really understand that. The significance of the exploitation of the indigenous cultures in this country, the genocide. I lived next to the Fort Hall Indian Reservation. had many friends who were Native American. Did I really understand the significance of the European invasion of the North American continent, the extirpation of vast peoples? That when Lewis and Clark, that came through Idaho, that they were able to make that journey partly because the entire Midwest had been depopulated. Where there had been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that were living, it was completely vacant now because the Europeans brought, smallpox and measles and everything else, and then also destroyed and pillaged and rampaged up through the Mississippi Valley and gone. So, I was completely oblivious to that. Some of my closest friends were Japanese American. Did I know, growing up in this little community, that there was a Japanese internment camp, within a couple of an hour's drive from my hometown, okay? And that's why there were Japanese Americans that lived in my community, is that this country during World War II put them in concentration camps. And I loved, growing up in that area, but that kind of cultural awareness is really important. And sorry to get off on this sort of sermon about understanding the origins of where we're coming from, and to looking at them really in a critical, expansive way that helps us understand where we are on this planet and the significance of what we do. Yeah.
Wouldn't you argue that in our globalized world today, like the West and the East, like Pacific cultures don't exist in like a monolith anymore, and they're sort of blending together?
Oh,
and
yeah.
we need to understand their culture as much as they can understand ours.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a question of, to me, it's a question of a scholarly, of sequencing, and it's a function of time. It's a function of engagement. I don't know whether it was clear to you. We may have talked about this before. The origins of this course. The origins of this course was a little bit of a presentation at the beginning of the semester, but I don't think it fully captured what it is that the founders of this course, as inadequate as any course ultimately is, but this course was founded in 1946 as a form of an extension, as part of kind of what we call the Meeman Center today. It was formed by a group of faculty members in history, philosophy, and so on. And the whole idea was to try to understand what went wrong. What went wrong that one of the most educated and highly culturally refined and influential societies in the world, in the history of humankind, could unleash forces that would result in the deaths of 20 million people. How is it that the fascists could gain control of a country as educated and affluent as Germany? How did that happen? That it could then systematically try to destroy an entire race. How did that happen? To try to understand, what is it about the humanistic tradition? What is it about the Western tradition that made that possible? In a way, and quite literally, this course is designed to prevent another Holocaust. That's a tall order. It is to inform ourselves about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and to prevent it from happening again. Because it could. It could very easily happen again. It's happening in pockets around the world today, but it could happen again. So really, I view this course as a critique of our society. It is to help us understand that the tyrant sleeps within us all. We're all capable of herding people into a gas chamber and flipping on the Xylon gas. We're all capable of doing that. We could do that. So, we don't want to. We want that never to happen. But unless we internalize the fact that we are capable of that, and that we really focus on not being those people, that's what we're all about, to understand it. To see the steps where things went wrong, okay? and to diagnose it and to better understand it. You live in an incredibly privileged position now, where what you occupy on this planet is incredibly privileged, and that's why it's so important for you in particular to understand these things, because you are the people who can pull the levers of society, and you can make a difference. So, Carolyn, you're going to say something.
Just kind of in light of all of that, and like with the awareness of how like globalized our modern life is become, like with the internet especially, do you think it would be worthwhile for just like, I don't know about this course, but Rhodes, to make it more of a mandatory thing for people to not just investigate, Europe and the Western, but also everything else in the world, and not just that, but like closer to the present time period, because a lot of these texts aren't really influential and had a big impact in our society, but also, like you said, events like the Holocaust that were more recent have a, maybe not as big or bigger, I don't know, but a significant impact on our society as well.
Right.
And so maybe looking at stuff that's more recent in addition to the more ancient stuff could be useful.
Well, that is the whole goal of the search course is to take you from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the 21st century.
Do we get to the 21st
That was
century?
the third.
The third semester.
Okay.
The third semester picks up with the Renaissance, and it takes you to the 21st century, to the current events.
Does it touch, I guess I know it splits them into more specialized courses. Do any of them venture outside of the Western world?
It is entirely Western centric. That's not to say that certain professors will bring in certain comparanda, certain things to contrast with the Western centric. But for the most part, it is Western centric. Should the course, I would certainly welcome a parallel sequence of courses for more global awareness, but what would that look like? Would we choose Eastern? Would that be, I do think that it's a matter of picking and choosing. We can't do everything, so what can we do and what should we do? But the whole idea of the search is to trace these cultural influences all the way from their origins, at least the origins insofar as we can understand their origins, right? The whole notion of drama, human beings emulate, okay? So drama does not belong to the Greeks, although the particular form of drama that we use today was influenced by their conventions. The drama is indigenous in all cultures, right? So, how do we go about that? I think this is a really important conversation and discussion. It's because you've been toiling, okay? You've been working right now in the 5th century, right? You've been toiling away, right? And you're just thinking, oh my God, am I ever going to get to my own century, And I understand that. But I totally get it. But, and I think you're going to experience this at the end of the class when you read Dante, and you will see why all of the effort that you put into this pays off when you see that. When you read the other things, Marx, okay, when you read Freud, all of these things that have shaped our culture are all based on the layers of society that we're now exploring and that you're becoming more and more familiar with. And so that's really the payoff. The payoff is when you read a poem by T.S. Eliot, for example, or Gwendolyn Brooks, or Adrian Kennedy, or any of these poets, when you read that poem and you understand it because you know what she's alluding to, when you go and you see a picture of Cy Twombly, okay, this amazing modern artist, and you recognize a name in there from your reading, that's the payoff. That's the moment when you begin to see the connections and the cultural relevance of what we're doing here. So this course is not about an immediate payoff. It's about something that will happen 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, when you will suddenly say, boy, it's sort of like, I don't know, Odysseus. That's sort of like Augustine. Oh my God, my mother's out of control. What am I going to do? It's sort of like Monica, that you will make a connection with people who have lived thousands of years ago, and that will make your own human experience so much richer. So even though I work you really hard, okay, and I grade you, and and I hopefully encourage you and spur you on and make you work harder than you want to work and all that sort of thing. The payoff, there is some immediate payoff, but the payoff is really down the road. We're storing it up, we're putting it in the bank, okay? So when sometime it's gonna make sense to you, and you're gonna see, that's why Professor Rowe is such a fill in the blank. Could be strong, could be less strong, could be more benign, more neutral. Could be really bad, you know, could be like stars. So anyway, yes, I love Eastern culture. I would love to do that. That would be fantastic. We should do everything. Let's learn everything. Let's just do it. Let's just do it. All right? Are you in? We're going to learn everything. Okay? And if we can't do it right now, we'll sequence it. Okay? And we're going to roll around. Oh, for example, how about if we read about someone who is at the height, really moves in the very highest political circles. Okay. There's a change in regime, and he finds himself sentenced to death. Someone who is incredibly highly educated, was a phenomenal magistrate, was lauded within his society, had a fantastic, successful family, and is now on death row, and he's about to be executed. Why? Because he was friends and he associated with the people who are no longer in power, okay, and it's payback. That's Boethius. And he's going to write to you, and he's going to ask himself, what was the point of it? Why did I go to Rhodes College? What is the point of being a highly educated person when there's nothing I can do, when my education is of no benefit to me? I'm sitting in a prison cell. Well, it's not quite that bad. I am incarcerated, okay? I'm going to die. Why did I, what was the point of it all? Why did I do it? And he's going to tell you. Or he's going to make an argument, okay? He's going to get a visit from Philosophia. And they're going to have an argument, a debate about the human soul, about the intellect. Because that can happen. I mean, that happens. I mean, we can read the news about people that, there's just a change in government, and all of a sudden the opposition find themselves in prison. And Nelson Mandela, for example. So I hope that your education doesn't come into good stead when you're in prison, but you never know.
When we're in prison?
What's that?
You said when, not if.
I said you never know. I said hopefully it never will be that case, but no, you're all fantastic, and being able to, and these documents, these have been life altering for many people. These have just changed people's lives, and it may be life altering for some of you. You never know. All right, so yes, we should do it all, and I think your points are very well taken, and we do need to steep ourselves and immerse ourselves in other traditions. We don't know enough about the people of other parts of the country, the world. Americans are woefully undereducated in these sorts of things. For example, the Ottoman Empire. Right? Ottoman Empire, enormously influential empire for 500 years. Right? I think in the recent textbooks that I looked at, the world history textbooks, there's like a page and a half. Okay. If you, in the mid-17th century, if you could choose one place to be on this planet, it would have been Constantinople. That's where things, Istanbul, that's where things were happening. You would not want to have been in London. It's like the worst possible place to live. Or Paris or any of these, the places that were really amazing. And that's true of lots of places around on the planet, okay? That at certain times you would want to have been there to see what that was like. So yeah, so let's do it all. We'll start with a wee bit of Augusta. So we've only got a few minutes. Sophia, I've taken up your whole time. I'm so sorry. You put Pierce up to this, didn't you? You totally put Pierce up. Are there any observations while we're talking about this? You want to let's just talk more about this, and we'll get started with Boethius on Friday.
About
Other comments about what this is all about?
what's
Criticism, yes, Grace.
I mean, would you suggest any specific book to read to be more enlightened on Westminster and how like industries being intertwined, I guess?
Go to Pierce's class and get some suggestions there. You know, where to start? I mean, that's just such a difficult, really a difficult question. The cultural origins of the planet, it's really hard, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I love, like, listening to these, but, like, does it, like, affect our grade when we don't talk about it? No, because I, like, love, like, listening, but, like,
Yes.
I still worry.
Yeah.
During like all of these books being written, is there like a parallel in all those other countries where like you can sort of see, or especially like in like architecture, how like the Egyptians and like how they build like pyramids versus like people in South America who built like almost similar styles, but like they're thousands of miles apart. Is there like a similar trend in like literature?
So at this particular time, really the Mediterranean area is dominated by the Roman Empire, and so it is most of the people, the sort of indigenous forms of literature are just now evolving. Take for example Arabic. Arabic, really, the Quran is one of the foundational documents for the evolution of Arabic as we know it today. The Shahnameh, which is an epic written in Persia, is really the foundation of Farsi, of Persian language today. Just as the Iliad and the Homeric poems were, to a large extent, the linguistic foundation for Greek, or at least contributed to it. So I don't know what was happening in China in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE. There was obviously a lot going on there, or in any of the other Asian cultures. We have a pretty good idea that some really amazing things were happening on this continent, right? We don't have so much a literature as there is some, but it's a little bit later. You know, the Mayans, for example, the Olmecs, and so on. They had an amazing society. And if you think that the Romans were a bloody society, just have a look at the Mayans. Okay, I mean and the Aztecs. I mean they take. It's to a whole new level of, it's an amazing, it's amazing, flourishing culture, but oh my goodness. Yeah.
So like 1,500 years from now, do you think people will still look at our civilization as purely Western in its concept, even with the interconnectedness like Carolyn was mentioning? Like, will Western civilization continue to exist as it does now, or will it begin to blend with East, and then we have some sort of conglomeration of both of them?
That's a good question. I think, science fiction writers have sort of imagined a world, okay, so for example, A Clockwork Orange envisioned a world in which the Soviet, the Russian world would blend with the West, and we would have this hybrid culture and language. Blade Runner, for example, envisions a world where it's a combination of Eastern Asian languages and English. There are all these sort of regional Spanglish, for example. There are all these sort of mergers of linguistic, cultural things. I'd have to say, it's again just my view of it, that cultures are amazingly resistant to that kind of wholesale change. You only have to go to Jerusalem to see the power of cultural continuity. and how we, I think to a certain extent, as our societies, our world becomes more interdependent and more globalized, that there's also almost an inverse interest in our own cultural heritage, and we become more and more attached to it in a kind of a strange functional way. I mean, it's kind of an interesting. I mean, I experienced this. For example, I went to school in Germany, and I found myself, as the boundaries between my identity as an American and as a German, in that particular moment, as I felt them blending, I was becoming more and more in my thinking, in my speech, and what I did, as I became more and more German, I found a counter-reaction to that I wanted to be more and more identified as an American, right? So I started chewing gum, okay? Right? Started wearing baseball hats, okay? Just because there was some unconscious, almost irrational impulse to claim my identity. It's an odd feeling as you feel your own sort of identity disappear. And I think that we see that in this country. This country, for all of its faults, it's an amazingly diverse country for all of the reasons, some of which we've been talking about. It's an amazingly diverse country. And if you look at it still, how in major urban areas, how communities have resisted to a certain extent change and have identified themselves and have maintained a cultural continuity, even within enormous forces of globalization and syncretism, okay? So it is, yes, it is an amazing thing in that we all think in terms of this global interconnected thing, but at the same time, I think we all feel to a certain extent, or more or less, an impulse to claim and to celebrate our own identities. I think ethnicity is something that we live in a world of very contested issues of ethnicity. What does it mean? We are all, the blending of cultures is happening, absolutely. There's no doubt about that, just in terms of our population, right? But at the same time, I think there are groups to which we all belong that there is great emphasis placed on, forming families within a particular framework, right? Within a particular ethnic framework often, or a religious framework. So we live in a time of, and this is really it's not entirely new, but the scale at which it operates, I think, is something very new. Our major urban areas, Memphis is certainly one of them, looks vastly different than it did 50, 100 years ago. And that's simply because of the migrations of people and immigration and these changes. It's a much more culturally diverse world. Whether that cultural diversity results in some sort of fusion, cultural fusion, rock and roll. It's one of the great cultural fusions of our lifetimes, right? And that's the blending of these musical traditions. So what happens when something like this is for Dallas? Okay, so she feels better. When you haven't had a chance to do anything, I just mark that as just take it out of the equation. So it's okay. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. All right, okay. Well, off you go.